Meanwhile, Republican legislators are ramping up their hate talk on trans people. And this starts with myths that they're promulgating and then leads to laws they are passing based on those myths. Aaron Reed, who has a Substack called aaroninthemorning.com, which I highly recommend, writes, and is a trans person, writes about this. The House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Limited Government had a hearing recently, I guess it was last Friday, in which the Family Research Council, a group that the Southern Poverty Law Center has identified as a hate speech group, a hate group, testified, and they just told a bunch of lies, basically. Aaron is referring to it as misinformation. I consider these lies about trans people. For example, Jennifer Bowens, representing the Family Research Council, consistently cited, this is from Aaron's newsletter, consistently cited what she referred to as the Swedish study during the hearing. According to her claims, the Swedish study indicates that transgender individuals face a 19 times higher suicide rate even after undergoing gender-affirming care. Elon Musk has recently retweeted this study. But, you know, it's just not true. The study, the Sweden study, was done in the 70s and 80s when it was almost impossible to get transgender care. And it also includes all deaths, which includes AIDS and HIV. AIDS and HIV were just ravaging the gay community back then. And you know, the numbers of that study, you know, and they weren't comparing trans people who were allowed to get gender-affirming care with trans people who were not. Rather, they just compared all trans people to the general population, and surprise, surprise, 19 times more likely to commit suicide. Well, yeah, especially in the 80s, in the 70s. So this study is, you know, being badly misused to the point that the author of the study, a Swiss scientist by the name of Cecilia Dehaene, said, quote, "The conclusion that cross-sex hormone treatment increases suicide rate is completely wrong," has basically repudiated her own study from 50 years ago, 40 some odd years ago. Then another lie, Congressman Hunt, a Republican, displayed a picture board featuring the food pyramid with all foods replaced by ice cream and said, you know, if you give kids ice cream, you know, let them eat the foods they want, they'll all want ice cream. If you let them just pick the gender they want, they might pick some other gender. Well, it's just not true. Most children, by the time they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, absolutely know what gender they feel they are. And for, you know, well over 90% of children, it's the gender they were born as. But for a small percentage of children, they feel deep down inside, it's part of their absolute and essential identity, that they are not the gender they were born as. And these are the people that become trans people. Hunt's, you know, lie about, oh, it's just a choice and it's just a fad. I mean, this is terrible. A recent report in The Lancet, for example, July 26th, the gender-affirming care is associated with an improved quality of life and plays a crucial role in the well-being of transgender youth. Numerous studies have shown that it leads to positive psychological outcomes and reduces suicide rate. Most recent study shows that providing gender-affirming care reduces the suicide rate among trans individuals by 73%. Over 50 scientific peer-reviewed papers have been compiled by Cornell University underscoring the beneficial effects of gender-affirming care. Then Matt Gaetz comes out, and he says that a bill passed in Washington state this year, Senate Bill 5599, quote, allows the state to take kids away and administer gender blockers to them. Well, again, it's a lie. It also is a lie that circulates inside right-wing media and that Elon Musk boosted on Twitter. Donald Trump Jr. has said the same thing. In fact, he went on to say these sick bastards are evil. Right, but you know, he's lying about what the law says. The bill adds an exemption to a parental notification requirement. Basically, you know, right now, if a trans youth is seeking trans care, they have to have, you know, their parents have to be notified. And the provision that it added said that, you know, if you believe that your parents will withhold this or your parents are abusive, you don't have to have your parents involved. But it doesn't grant the state the authority to remove them from non-affirming parents' homes. And it does not modify the state's existing mature minor law. In other words, you have to be of a certain age and you have to jump through all kinds of hoops to get this kind of care. Then another right-wing spokesperson, Dr. Rowans, made multiple statements claiming that the rise in transgender identity is due to social contagion. In other words, it's a fad. One such study knocking this down was published in the journal Pediatrics, peer-reviewed journal, specifically examining this notion and concluded that it's false. Trans youth have a long-standing awareness of their gender identity before coming out. And this is the point that I was making. There is this small percentage of people who just know deep down inside from the time they're children that they're not in the body, that they're born into the wrong body. More than 60 psychological associations, including the American Psychological Association, the Society of Behavioral Medicine, have called for the abandonment of these kinds of false memes like social contagion. They're just not true. But meanwhile, based on these lies that I just laid out for you, more than 80 pieces of legislation seeking to restrict access to a gender-affirming care have been introduced around the country. This is just as of February 9th, because tracking this legislation often, you know, there's usually about a 6-month delay. At least 4 states have seen bills that would restrict such care for individuals who are adults over the age of 18. Typically what they do is they pass a law saying people under 18 don't have access to gender-affirming care. And then they come back the next year and say, oh, we're going to lift the cap on that and just make it everybody. Well, they've already lifted the cap or tried to in 4 different states. And what is this all about? Well, conservatives are trying to politicize the lives of trans people because they don't want us talking about what they want to do to Social Security, what they want to do to Medicare, how they want to cut more taxes on billionaires, how they want to further destroy the middle class, how they want to outlaw unions. They don't want people talking about their actual agenda, that they don't want to do anything about climate change, that they want to actually increase the level of pollution in our cities and counties that's causing cancer and, of course, climate change. In Mississippi, they introduced a legislation that would have criminalized people who provided or aided in the provision of gender-affirming care. 5 years in prison. In South Carolina, Kansas, same deal. 2 near identical bills in South Carolina and Oklahoma go a step further, providing that, quote, a physician or other healthcare professional shall not provide gender transition procedures to anyone under the age of 26. Again, a felony with 5 years in prison. You know, this is a battlefield where Democrats are not, frankly, going to win much political advantage because the trans community is so small and does not have broad support among the American people, which is a tragedy. But God bless the Democrats who are standing up anyway, because it's the right thing to do.